The night wind moves softly through narrow canals, carrying the smell of salt water and spice, and somewhere in the quiet heart of a sleeping city, a story begins that will stretch farther than any map of its time. This is the story of a boy who would walk beyond the edge of the known world and come back changed forever in the year 1254. In the busy trading city of Venice, a boy named Marco Polo was born. Venice was a place of water and stone, of boats sliding through canals and merchants counting coins by candlelight. Ships arrived daily with silk, pepper, and stories from distant lands. Adventure lived in the air, and in Marco's family, it lived in the blood. His father, Niccolo Polo, and his uncle, Marco Polo, were not ordinary traders. They were men who traveled farther than most people dared. While Marco was still very young, they left home and journeyed east. Chasing trade and opportunity far beyond familiar roads, they crossed harsh lands and strange cities, moving deeper into Asia than almost any Europeans before them. Their travels eventually brought them to the court of Kublai Khan, the powerful ruler of the Mongol Empire. His empire was vast, stretching across lands most people in Europe had never imagined. But Kublai Khan was not the wild barbarian many feared. He was thoughtful, curious, and eager to learn about the world beyond his borders. He welcomed the Polo brothers with respect and interest. Kublai Khan asked them questions about Europe, about faith, science, and customs. He listened closely and then made a request that would change everything. He asked Niccolo and Mafio to return west as his messengers. He wanted learned men from Europe to come east and share their knowledge. With his blessing, the brothers turned back toward home. When they finally returned to Venice years later, they found Marco no longer a child. He was a teenager now, sharp-eyed and full of questions. He listened as his father and uncle spoke of deserts, mountains, and cities richer than dreams. Marco felt something stir inside him, a pull toward the horizon he could not ignore. So, in 1271, the three Polos set out together. Father, uncle, and son began a journey that would become legend. They left familiar streets behind and moved steadily east. They crossed lands of burning sun and bitter cold. They passed through Persia, across deserts where sand swallowed the road, and over mountains where the air grew thin and cruel. The journey was slow and dangerous. They faced sickness, thieves, and the constant threat of the unknown. But Marco watched everything closely. He saw how people lived, how they prayed, how they ruled their cities. He noticed their clothes, their food, and their markets. His mind collected details the way merchants collected gold. After more than 3 long years of travel, the Polos reached the summer capital of Kublai Khan. The city rose before them like something from a dream. There were wide streets, shining buildings, and gardens filled with flowing water. Silk and marble surrounded the great palace, and the air felt heavy with power and beauty. Kublai Khan remembered the Polo brothers and welcomed them again. This time his attention turned to Marco. The young man spoke clearly and listened carefully. He learned new languages and showed a deep curiosity about the empire around him. The Khan saw something special in him and soon brought Marco into his service. Marco Polo did not live as a prisoner or a guest. He became a trusted servant of the Khan. He traveled on missions across the empire, carrying messages and observing distant regions. He saw vast cities with busy canals, markets filled with goods beyond imagining, and systems of government that worked with stunning order. One thing amazed him more than anything else. In China, people used paper money. Thin pieces of printed paper were trusted like gold. To Marco, this seemed almost like magic. He knew Europe would not believe such a thing. For many years, Marco traveled farther and farther, reaching lands few outsiders had ever seen. He crossed rivers, forests, and plains that seemed endless. Everywhere he went, he watched and remembered. His mind became a bridge between worlds that did not yet know each other. But time moves quietly, even in great courts. As the years passed, Kublai Khan grew older. Marco felt the weight of time and distance. Though he had seen wonders beyond measure, his thoughts began to drift back to Venice, to the sound of water against stone, and the memory of home. And slowly, a question formed in his heart. How does a man leave the greatest empire on earth and still live to tell its story? Leaving the court of Kublai Khan was not as simple as packing a bag and walking away. The great ruler had trusted Marco Polo for many years, sending him across distant lands and relying on his clear mind and steady loyalty. Marco had become part of the empire's inner rhythm, and the Khan was not eager to let him go. But time changes even the strongest bonds. The empire was aging, and so was its ruler. When a request finally came that required a long and dangerous journey, Kublai Khan agreed to release the Polos under one condition. They were to escort a young Mongol princess to Persia, where she was to marry a powerful ruler. Only then would they be free to return west. So Marco, his father Niccolo, and his uncle Maffeo joined a large fleet and set sail from the Chinese coast. The sea was wide and unforgiving. Storms rose without warning. Ships vanished into waves. Sickness spread, and fear traveled faster than the wind. By the time the fleet reached Persia, only a small number of those who had started the journey was still alive from Persia. The Polos traveled overland, moving through familiar roads that now felt strange after so many years in the East. Their clothes, their speech, even the way they carried themselves had changed. When they finally reached Venice in 1295, the city barely recognized them. The people of Venice stared at the three men in foreign robes, who spoke of distant emperors and cities of endless wealth. Some whispered that they were liars. Others thought they were magicians. Few believed their stories of paper money, vast canals, and cities larger than anything in Europe. Life in Venice did not settle quietly. A war broke out between Venice and Genoa, and Marco Polo was captured during a naval battle. He was thrown into a prison cell far from the silk halls of Asia. It was there, in darkness and stillness, that his journey took a final and unexpected turn. In prison, Marco met a writer named Rustichello. As nights passed and sleep came slowly, Marco began to speak. He told of deserts and emperors, of strange animals and powerful systems, of cities that glowed like jewels. Rustichello listened and wrote, shaping Marco's memories into words. The book that emerged became known as The Travels of Marco Polo. It spread quickly across Europe. People read it with wonder and doubt. Some claimed it was filled with lies. Others felt their world grow larger with every page. The book reached sailors, scholars, and dreamers. It painted Asia not as a land of monsters, but as a place of order, beauty, and deep culture. It whispered of possibilities beyond the horizon and planted restless ideas in young minds. Marco Polo was finally released from prison and returned to a quiet life in Venice. He married, raised a family, and worked as a merchant. He never returned to the East, yet the East never truly left him. As years passed, his stories continued to travel, even when he no longer did. They crossed borders and oceans, lighting sparks in those who longed to explore. One such spark would one day reach a young man named Christopher Columbus, who carried Marco's book as a guide while chasing his own impossible dream. And as Marco Polo grew old, people still asked if his stories were true. He listened, smiled softly, and held his silence. The greatest journeys, after all, are not always believed. Some are simply remembered by those brave enough to dream beyond the edge of the world. As the years moved quietly forward, Marco Polo faded from public life, but his story did not. Venice continued its trade and politics, yet something had shifted beneath the surface. Europe was no longer sealed inside its own small imagination. A door had been opened, and even those who doubted Marco's words could not fully close it again. Marco lived his remaining years as a respected merchant. He walked the same streets where he had once played as a child, though he now carried the weight of distant deserts and foreign skies inside him. Sometimes, as he watched ships leave the harbor, his thoughts drifted east to jade palaces, endless roads, and the quiet authority of Kublai Khan. He never returned there, but the journey never truly ended. When Marco Polo died in 1324, people gathered and spoke of his life with mixed voices. Some still believed he exaggerated his tales. Others whispered that no man could invent such detail without having lived it. According to those closest to him, when pressed one last time about the truth of his stories, Marco simply said that he had not told even half of what he saw. Time, patient and honest, began to prove him right. Centuries later, historians confirmed many of his descriptions Chinese cities were indeed vast and organized. Paper money existed. Trade routes stretched farther than Europe had imagined. Marco's world, once thought impossible, slowly became real. But Marco Polo was more than a traveler or a merchant. He was a bridge. He connected worlds that feared each other, not with armies or conquests, but with words and wonder. He described people not as monsters, but as human beings, living rich and complex lives. In an age of fear and myth, that alone was revolutionary. His book continued to travel long after his footsteps faded. It crossed borders and generations, inspiring explorers who would chase their own horizons. Some would seek wealth, some glory, some knowledge. Many would make mistakes. Some would change the world forever. And at the heart of that restless movement was a Venetian boy who once listened closely and remembered everything. So now, as the night grows still and sleep begins to pull gently at your thoughts, imagine a quiet room lit by lantern light. A man sits there, older now, his hands folded, his eyes filled with distant reflections. Outside, the world is vast and waiting. Picture deserts glowing under moonlight, cities humming with unseen life, caravans moving like slow rivers across the earth. Hear the soft echo of hooves, the whisper of silk, the rustle of paper money changing hands. Feel the sense of awe that comes from realizing how large the world truly is. Marco Polo was not just a man who traveled far. He was a man who paid attention, and because he did, the world became bigger for everyone who followed. Sleep now, gentle explorer. Let your dreams wander across ancient roads and quiet seas. Let history carry you softly into rest, and may your dreams, like Marco's journey, stretch far beyond the edge of the known world.